Book 17, guys. Telemachus, who has avoided the ambush of the suitors in the harbor, he returns to the palace from Eumaeus' hut, and he walks in, and Eurycleia, remember the loyal nursemaid, is the first to see him, and she is relieved that he's still alive. She bursts into tears. All right? Now, Penelope, too, is relieved. She starts crying, and Telemachus responds like a man, at least the ancient Greek version of a man, and he starts giving orders, okay? He says, look, I'm not going to be babied anymore. You know, that's not what I'm going to do anymore. I got to stand up for myself. So lines 49 through 59, he says, don't make me weep, mother, or get me all worked up. I barely escape with my life. Now bathe yourself and put on clean clothes, then go to your bedroom upstairs with your maids and vow formal sacrifice to the immortal gods in the hope that Zeus will grant us vengeance. I'm going to town so I can invite to our house a stranger who came here with me from Pylos. That's Theoclymenus, right, guys? The seer that's on the run that he picked up at Pylos. I sent him on ahead with some of my crew, and I told Piraeus to take him home and show him hospitality until I arrived. Now, at this point, he starts telling Penelope about his journey to Pylos and Sparta, and he tells exactly, he says, look, Nestor and Pylos didn't know anything about Odysseus, but Menelaus, who took 7 years to get home, he told the whole story. And in this speech, it's actually word for word from the first time Menelaus spoke. But Telemachus is quoting it, so this must be a very important speech. Remember how Menelaus had to trick the old man of the sea, and then by disguising underneath of 2 seal skins, then they had to jump him, and the old man of the sea was a shape changer, blah, 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 blah. And then he asked, well, how are all the other Greek guys? And the old man of the sea says, everyone's home except for you and Odysseus. So Menelaus' speech, word for word, is spoken in Book 17, even though it was all the way back in Book whatever it was. Okay, so this is a very important speech. And he tells what he had heard about Odysseus, that he was stuck. Now, at this point, Theoclymenus is brought up, and he has another prophecy. Okay? The suitors just won't listen, though. There are so many signs that tell the suitors to back off, and they just don't listen. And, of course, that will be their doom. And the prophecy is lines 160 to 172. He says to Penelope, revered lady, wife of Laertes' son Odysseus, Menelaus is in the dark about all this, about what's going on with Odysseus. But now hear what I have to say, for I will prophesy unerringly to you and conceal nothing. With Zeus above all gods as my witness, I swear by this table of hospitality and by Odysseus' hearth to which I have come, that this same Odysseus, mark my words, is at this very moment in his own native land, sitting still or on the move, learning of this evil, and he is sowing evil for all the suitors. Such as the bird of omen I saw from the ship, and I cried it out to Telemachus. So Theoclymenus doubles down. He says not only will Odysseus be home soon, he says he's already home. It's just a matter of time. The suitors won't listen, though. It's pretty incredible. So Odysseus and Eumaeus were back at Eumaeus' hut. They start to make their way to the palace. And along the way, they meet this dude, Melanthius. See that M-E-L? Oftentimes, M-E-L means bad. There's a female servant that is also bad. Her name is Melantho. So Melanthius and Melantho, it's kind of a doubling of bad servants, these two. Just like Eurycleia and Penelope are kind of both mothering to Odysseus, even though they don't have the same first couple letters of their name. But Melanthius, this is a bad. He's an evil goat herder. Lines 236 to 252. This guy is an insulting jerk. He says, when he sees Eumaeus and Odysseus walking up, he said, well, look at this. Trash dragging along trash. Birds of a feather, as usual. Where are you taking this walking pile of bleep? You miserable hog tender. This diseased beggar who will slobber up all over our feasts? How many doorposts has he rubbed with his shoulders, begging for scraps? You think he's ever gotten a proper present, a cauldron or sword? Give him to me and I'll have him sweep out the pens and carry loads of shoots for the goats to eat. Sweeping out the pens is goat poop. It's kind of gross. Put some muscle on his thigh by drinking whey. I'll bet he's never done a hard day's work in his life. No, he prefers to beg his way through town for food to stuff into his bottomless belly. I'll tell you this, though, and you cannot count on it. If he comes to the palace of godlike Odysseus, he'll be pelted with footstools aimed at his head. If he's lucky, they'll only splinter on his ribs. This is actually foreshadowing. This is exactly what happens. And this guy, guess what? He's on the list. He is not going to live. And even as he passes this moron, right, he tries to kick Odysseus down a ravine. They're up on kind of a hill where the path is, and he tries to kick him. Man, this guy is in trouble. Odysseus is seething with anger. Lines 272 to 278, you see that he tries to kick him. He talks back. Eumaeus tries to defend the beggar, and Melanthius talks back. He says, "Ooh, listen to the dog talk with his big bad notions. I'm going to take him off in a black ship someday, far from Ithaca, and sell him for a fortune. You want to know what my prayer is? May Apollo with his silver bow strike Telemachus dead today in his halls, or may the suitors kill him, as surely as Odysseus is lost for good in some faraway land." He left with that. They walked on slowly while the goatherd pushed ahead and came quickly to the palace. Not a cool dude. Okay? This is a bad man. Eumaeus will go to the palace first, he tells Odysseus. And Odysseus, well, he doesn't know it's Odysseus yet, but he tells the beggar to follow him in soon after he goes in. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of the Odyssey. Odysseus has another revelation, another anagnoresis. This one is to Argus the dog. This was Odysseus' dog 20 years ago. This dog is 20 years old. It's lame. The suitors have mistreated it. They've forgotten about him. He can't walk. He's blind. And he sleeps in a pile of dung that's outside the door that they use for manure, for fertilizer. And he's just waiting for his master to come home. As Odysseus approaches the palace, the dog sees him. He starts to wag his tail and whimper, and then he lets out his last breath, and he dies. This is so beautifully loyal. I want to read it to you, 317 to 354. Okay? And as they talked, a dog that was lying there lifted his head and pricked up his ears. This was Argus, whom Odysseus himself had patiently bred but never got to enjoy. Remember, he left. So Argus is just as old as Telemachus is, 20 years old, before he left for Ilion, Troy. The young men used to set him after wild goats, deer, and hare. Now, his master gone, he lay neglected in the dung of mules and cattle outside the doors, a deep pile where Odysseus's farm hands would go for manure to spread on his fields. There lay the hound Argus, infested with lice. And now, when he sensed Odysseus was near, he wagged his tail and dropped both ears, but could not drag himself nearer to his master. Odysseus wiped away a tear, turning his head, so Eumaeus wouldn't notice, and asked him, "Eumaeus, isn't it strange that this dog is lying in the dung? It looks like a great dog." Eumaeus says, "Oh, yes, he belonged to Odysseus. He was a great dog. He was quite an animal once. There's nothing in the deep woods that dog couldn't catch, and what a nose he had for tracking. But he's fallen on hard times now that his master has died abroad," Odysseus. "These feckless women don't take care of him. Servants never do right." So saying, Eumaeus entered the great house, and the hall filled with the insolent suitors. But the shadow of death descended upon Argus, once he had seen Odysseus after 20 years. Really beautiful, really just a wonderful little scene there. Now, when Odysseus walks in, Telemachus spots his dad, disguised as a beggar, and brings him food. He brings him a big old chunk of bread. And Odysseus says that he will beg from each of the suitors. He'll go around the room, all the way around, begging the suitors. They're sitting on the edges of the room to test them. If they give him food, okay, but that's not bad. You still might die, but at least you gave me food. The funny thing is, this isn't even their house or food or wine that they'd be offering to this beggar. So they're offering Odysseus his own food, wine, to the beggar, not knowing that it's Odysseus' own stuff. These guys are selfish jerks. Antinous is the first one to be a jerk to Odysseus. And Telemachus tries to stand up for the beggar. Antinous actually threatens Odysseus with a stool. He threatens to throw it at him. Then he eventually does throw a stool at Odysseus. He threatens him, line 483 to 490. Lines 483 to 490. He says, "What god has brought this plague in here, this beggar? Get off to the side away from me, or I'll show you Egypt and Cyprus, you pushy panhandler. You don't know your place. You make your rounds and everyone hands things out recklessly. And why shouldn't they? It's easy to be generous with someone else's wealth." And eventually, Odysseus keeps pushing him, and he does throw the stool, lines 502 to 506. As he spoke, he grabbed the footstool and threw it, hitting Odysseus under his right shoulder blade. Odysseus stood there as solid as a rock and didn't even blink. He only shook his head in silence and brooded darkly. Now, the way I describe this is like a rock when a wave hits it and the wave is forced to go around the rock. Odysseus is the rock, and this stool is the wave. And Odysseus is so powerful that the stool has no harm on him whatsoever. Now, at this point, Odysseus curses Antinous, lines 509 to 516. He says, "Hear me, suitors of our glorious queen, so I can speak my mind. No one regrets being hit while fighting for his own possessions, his cattle, or his own sheep. But Antinous struck me because of my belly, that vile growling beast that gives us so much trouble. If there are gods for beggars or avenging spirits, may death come to Antinous before marriage does." And Antinous pipes right back at him. He says, "Just sit still and eat, stranger, or get the hell out. Keep talking like this, and some of the young men here will haul you up by the feet all through the house and strip the skin right off your back." You imagine how painful that would be? So, suitors are not happy that Antinous mistreats a beggar because the rules of hospitality say that it could be a god in disguise. So they're very, they're like, "Yo, Antinous, take it easy, man. Who knows?" At this point, I have the final two words of the Easter egg question. The final two words are a gallon. So you got to string all those together, answer the question, and then send me an email saying the correct answer, and then you will get the points for this little Easter egg hunt. Okay, finally, Penelope wishes to speak to the stranger beggar. Has she figured it out? I don't know. Question marks. And she asks that he be brought up so they can speak. Lines 576 to 595. She says, "Go call him here so he can tell me face to face. As for these men, let them play their games outside or here in the house. They're in a good mood, as they well might be, their own possessions lying safe at home, their bread and sweet wine feeding only their servants, while they themselves mob our house day after day, slaughtering all our oxen, our sheep and fat goats, partying and recklessly drinking our wine, ruining everything. For there's no man here like Odysseus to protect this house. But if Odysseus should ever come home, he and his son would make them pay for this outrage." Just as he finished, Telemachus sneezed. Apparently, this is another good sign in the ancient Greek world. If someone sneezes right when you say a prophecy or something, apparently that's a good sign. So she says, "Go ahead and call the stranger for me. Didn't you see my son sneeze at my words? That means death will surely come to the suitors, one and all. Not a single man will escape. So next time you sneeze and you said something, see if it comes true, or whether someone dies around you. Wouldn't that be weird?" So Odysseus says he will speak to her after nightfall because the suitors could be upset that this beggar was called up to speak to the queen, Penelope. So he says, "I can't meet her now. If the suitors see me, they'll be very upset. Let me wait till after nightfall to go see Penelope." At the end of this book, Eumaeus leaves the palace to go protect the pigs, showing again how loyal he is to Odysseus. And Odysseus is finally in his own house, just waiting